or external, that it is contingent upon something. We're in agreement. I just don't know where Craig decides to use, if the universe has an explanation for its existence, the explanation is God. And while I don't want this entire video to be a rebuttal to one thing that William Lane Craig said, the fact of the matter is that when discussing this, instead of arguing and presenting any justification for his second premise, that if there's an explanation for the universe, that explanation is God, he instead tries to argue a little differently. He says that if atheism is true, and here he has to be talking about hard atheism or anti-theism, or basically the claim that no God exists. So on non-theism would probably be a better way to put this, then the universe has no explanation of its existence. And if the universe has an explanation for its existence, then atheism isn't true. Instead of defending why he gets to just assert that there's a God, he goes on to make additional assertions. His claim is that if there's not a God, then the universe doesn't have an explanation for its existence. Well, how did you determine that? I mean, you're living in a universe. Clearly it's here. Either there's a God or there's not. And if there's not a God, how did you determine that a universe couldn't exist? Even if the universe is contingent, it might be contingent on a multiverse or on something in the cosmos. But Craig's thing is, in order to argue for his premise that the explanation for the universe is God, he just says, if there's not a God, then the universe doesn't have an explanation. And if the universe has an explanation, then there must be a God. This is just a bald assertion that makes the entire discussion about his second premise circular. Now, we're stuck with this word universe, as we've talked about. There may be equivocation fallacies involved, but is the universe all there is? And as I mentioned before, I'll be using cosmos, and I'll try to do that in all the videos everywhere when I'm talking about all there is. If you were...
Okay, before we get into this, what do you think about this? He brings up like Craig and the gap problem again. Steve, any thoughts, Josh, that we haven't covered?
I think basically I covered most of that in the previous response when I say, well, we have to look at Craig's article in light of all of his other works where he does indeed cover the gap problem. So I don't necessarily think it would be fair to say, oh, Craig doesn't respond to the gap problem in this article because, well, he has covered it in multiple places. And just for reference, if you want to know where he covers the gap problem and it's kind of easily accessible, check out his discussion with Alex O'Connor. He does discuss the gap problem over there. So he does do that on multiple other places. So we can just find it over there instead.
Yeah, I mean, the theist has to do the work to show why the necessary foundation is God. But also thinking about this, wouldn't Matt have some burden to show, why he's not claiming the necessary foundation is the cosmos, but he brings this up a lot as kind of a rejoinder to the theist. And it's he doesn't give any justification for it. He just says, well, yeah, maybe this is just the way it is. So it seems to me potentially Matt will have to do that too. But I don't want to get into trying to shift the burden of proof on the other person. So yeah.
Though I do think you do raise a very interesting point about kind of the counter hypothesis and what role does counter hypothesis or what role do counter hypotheses play in discussions or debates or arguments, because essentially it's very easy to say, well, oh, the universe was caused by a brute factor. Oh, make all of these assertions, all of these other possibilities. But at the end of the day, if the probability of that other possibility that you're raising is 0.0001, yes, it might be a possibility, but is that a very good counter argument? It's not a very good counter argument. So I think that it's very important for people, if they want to provide an opposite solution, that they provide reasons for it. Just like if someone were to provide perhaps another hypothesis for why we think that God rose from the dead, they would have to provide reason for that hypothesis. They can't just say, well, maybe the disciples had a hallucination, then, well, problem solved. They have to provide a reason for that as well. I think it's unfair for the atheist to just get away without any burden of proof to just throw out possibilities all around the place.